Back in the day, did you ever use a BlackBerry? Have you ever sprayed your house with Febreze? Or, more likely, have you ever deployed an app to Vercel? If yes to any of these, then you've used a product that was named by today's guest, David Placek from Lexicon. He's an expert in naming companies. And today's episode, we're going to dig into what makes a great name. We're going to find out what are the biggest mistakes to avoid when naming a company.
The biggest mistake is really seeking safety, a safe port, if you will, which is to describe what this thing does. It just doesn't have the interest and the originality.
We're going to find out why the name Vercel helps them stand out in the market.
V, the sound of V, is based on our research, is the most alive and actually daring sound in the English alphabet.
Whether you really need to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on a .com domain.
I think communication is far more important than the URL.
And most importantly, what you can do at home to come up with really great names.
Think about how you want to behave in the marketplace. Think about how your brand is going to, in a small way or in a big way, change the future, change a category, right?
If you don't already have a name, today's episode is obviously interesting. But if you do already, I think it's still interesting. Vercel wasn't always called Vercel, they were called Zeit and they rebranded. And people are always coming out with product names, not just company names.
If you get the right name, the return on investment is 100x, 100x.
So I think today's episode, regardless of what stage you're at, is going to be really useful to keep in the back of your mind. Well, what do you think of scaling dev tools as a name?
With all names, there's usually pluses and minuses. Because your orientation is technology and what's happening with developers and where are developers going. And I remember that when we had an earlier conversation, you talked about, I think this would be useful for people who are developers, maybe launching a brand, and maybe you don't have the marketing sense, right? So I think in that direction, who you're appealing to, I think is a very comfortable name and a very relevant name, right? As you would broaden out, if you wanted to, then it becomes a less effective name for you, but it still has a real quality of accuracy, right? And believability. And there's all kinds of podcasts out there. Some are believable and educational, informative, and others are not, right? So I think your strength is that you err on that side of, I think I'm going to learn something from this person. So that was a long answer to your question. Hopefully it was helpful.
That is helpful. And feel free as well, to lay in, because I guess we're going to talk about the good names, but where do you see, you don't have to name and shame, but where do you see people making mistakes on kind of names as startups?
Well, the first, this is I think probably the most common mistake, is to let's describe what we do, right? And we see that technology space riddled with those types of things. I mean, you may I don't even know if it's still around, but you may recall InfoSeek, right? That's an example of a team that said, well, what do we do? And we said, well, we're helping someone seek the information they want. And then someone, I'm sure, said, InfoSeek, right? Now, it has some qualities. It's easy to say, info, seek. But compare that to Google, right? InfoSeek tells you kind of what it does. Google says that this is a new idea. It communicates or connotes that idea. There's something new here, right? And it adheres to a principle that we really try to enforce here, which is we want the audience to react, not necessarily in these words, but in this same sort of genre, which is, well, I'm looking at InfoSeek, I'm looking at Google. I don't know much about Google, but they're not like the other guys. They're not like InfoSeek. So what it does is it creates a predisposition to consider, right? And that's what a name can do. You don't look at a brand name and run down and buy it, but you do look at it and then decide to consider it or just move out and move beyond it. And things like InfoSeek just don't have that wealth of that. So that's to answer your question. The biggest mistake is really seeking safety, a safe port, if you will, which is to describe what this thing does. It just doesn't have the interest and the originality that something like a Google, and I don't mean to suggest to you or the audience that may listen to this that it has to be a made-up name. It could be something like Azure. It could be a constructed solution like PowerBook, or we take a fruit BlackBerry and we put it on a phone. So all those things say there's a new idea here.
This episode is brought to you by WorkOS. If you're building a dev tool, at some point your customers are going to start asking you for enterprise features. WorkOS offers you single sign-on, skim provisioning, and audit logs out the box. WorkOS is trusted by Perplexity and Versel, as well as Workbrew, a homebrew management startup that I recently interviewed. I just told Mike that WorkOS is the sponsor, and this is what Mike said.
Yeah, so WorkOS isn't paying me any money for this. I pay WorkOS money for this, but WorkOS is like one of the best developer tools I've ever used. It's the documentation and the experience with building with them is so good. Like, I initially was almost like, okay, this seems expensive, but then I built an integration with them in about 20 minutes that I had spent 2 days bang my head off the wall trying to build it directly with Okta. And then with WorkOS, I then have many SSO providers supported instead of just one. So yeah, for me, WorkOS is one of the nicest developer experiences I've encountered in the last 5 years, probably. And it's not surprising because a bunch of the developer team are ex-GitHub and therefore very good at their job.
Go to workos.com to learn more. You just dropped a few amazing names that you've named. So you've got there BlackBerry, Azure. I can see in your background, for anyone listening, we can see we're going to get to Vercel, but we can also see Febreze, Impossible, as in Impossible Burgers, Sonos, Lucid. That's it's quite
Thank you.
an impressive array of names that you've come up with.
It's based on, of course, a lot of experience. I mean, we're talking just over 4 decades, where it's a lot of trial and error and a lot of learning. But I think the one thing we have done is, and I can't tell you why I decided to do this, but we've invested heavily. I mean, I guess the reason was I wanted to be a leader in this category, and I don't think there's any evidence that you can lead anything unless you make investments in both time, talent, and money. And at this point, we're a little north of $7 million that we've invested in understanding how, language, linguistics, cognitive science, how those things really affect. If you know how the brain processes information, I mean, I think that now, looking back, when I started Lexicon, I didn't have even a thought about that. But we started looking into that probably 25 years ago. And now I know that if you know how the brain processes information, if you know how children learn language, those things they give you insights into what makes one name much better than another name. Why Google works so much better than InfoSeek, as an example, right? Why you can take a completely arbitrary name of a fruit, BlackBerry, and put it on a phone and it works magic for just a number of years, right? And then unfortunately for them, I mean, a great group of clients, but the world, I'm simplifying everything, the world said go left and they went right. And it's hard, when you do that in technology, it's hard to recover.
Yeah, that's, definitely miss those guys. I used to love my BlackBerry BBM. That was just, that was huge.
I still have it in my top desk drawer here at the office.
Yeah, the speed with which you could type with that was just incredible.
Just an awesome device. Yeah.
Really cool.
And such a great credential for us. I mean, people, they love their BlackBerries, they love the name. So I am truly sorry they went left when they were supposed to go right, or maybe they went right when they were supposed to go left. It doesn't really matter. You know the story better than I do, probably.
No, but I guess maybe that's a segue onto a company that seems to be going right when the world wants them to go right, which is Versel.
Yes.
So you named Versel.
Yeah, we did. We worked directly with the founder and his team. They were here in our, we're talking from our studio in Sausalito, California. They were here. We had a number of meetings. As an executive team, they saw the magic in a brand name. Not everybody sees that. So, there's still sort of a tradition of brand names is, one element of a marketing mix. But in this digital age that we live in, with all the innovations that have happened, think about Google and Amazon and Apple or Meta. These have all created more choice, more distractions, more channels of distribution, more competition. And so what's happened, and this is really good for us, is that brand names are no longer just like, okay, we got to get a few things right here, and brand names one of them. Brand names become really critical to success, right? They have to do more, and they have to work harder than ever before, because there's just not enough time like you had in earlier days to build interest and early share. And nowadays, if you don't do that, if you don't get interest early on, if you don't start getting share and get early momentum, you just become sort of laggard. And maybe you will survive if the money is there and people have patience and fund it, but a lot of times they just don't. They can't get to Series B. This applies not just to technology brands, but in consumer products. If a new brand of toothpaste doesn't take hold early on, it's going to end up on that bottom shelf. And again, if there's money and patience, it may stay there for a while. But I think more and more, what goes on the bottom shelf leaves the store pretty quickly. So good news for us, because we see names, and I know it sounds selfish, but we see names as a critical element, and we think, and this is the standard we set for Vercel, and they really bought into it. It should be your most distinctive and most original marketing element. And you could say, well, why is that? Well, it's an easy answer. Your name is the one thing that is going to be used longer and more often than anything else, right? And when we talk about that, clients, you get people saying, I haven't thought about it that way. Secondly, if you get a strong trademark, it's the one thing that your competitor can't take away from you. They can, butt up against the patents. They can kind of go around patents. They can get a similar color. They can behave in a certain way, mimic that behavior. They can't take your name, right? And so with Vercel, because what they were doing was so innovative, and the group, their behavior to us was one of, we can take risks, we have a lot of confidence. And so when we find those things, if they're doing innovative things, they have confidence, that's a great occasion for creating something new, right? And so part of what they did, so it's a simple solution, because they accelerate, right, their customers' success, right? And so a lot of names start with Excel and, acceleration. We just said, no, let's just take that CEL, right?
Yeah.
Which we see in biology, we see in, aircraft and avionics and acceleration, all sorts of stuff. And we just started playing with that. We also apply, and this is something we have invested heavily in also, in sound symbolism. So what does that mean? Well, you can look this up, and there's lots of articles on the web about this, although we've developed our own proprietary database. But every letter in the English alphabet evokes certain qualities. Now, some of those sounds are universal, right? This is a letter people can relate to. That V, the sound of V, is based on our research, is the most alive and actually daring sound in the English alphabet. So Corvette, Great name for a car that is sort of muscle car, goes fast. And so that aliveness and that daring, we put that V right in front. Now, it's not like Viagra, it's Ver. So it's not so in your face. Then you can say, well, there, variables, things like that. Verus, the Latin for true. So that's what we call is, not necessarily a completely global word unit, but across, the EU, North America, and even Latin America, that VER is familiar, right? So we have two familiar things. We put them together in a unique fashion, and you get distinctiveness, you get a level of memorability because they're familiar, right? And then so you have something new. So all those things come together, and we get that reaction from their customers. In theory, is that, hey, I got to take a look at these guys. I have to consider using them, and then you can see that they took off right away. I mean, they were successful from the get-go. Now, did the name do all that? No, of course not. Who they are and what they did, drove success. But I do believe, and I think a client team, including Guillermo, would agree with me that the name was very helpful to them.
Yeah, if they were called something, like you said, the mistake is to be like very specific. If they were called like deployfast.com or something, like, they're probably not going to be as successful as they are now.
No, too familiar. Too like, okay, and by the way, deploy fast or really fast or something like that, or true fast. Well, everybody is saying that in their all their competitors. And so all you do is you just walk yourself right back into competitive space. You want to be outside of the competitive space.
Yeah. So one thing also that you touched on there as well is that, like, you talk about like the internationalization. So once you have like an idea for a name that you think is cool, I don't know, or you like, that you feel like is strong, what kind of I know you do a lot of like checks and sort of what kind of things do you do after that?
It's fairly rigorous. So first thing is, this is a big hurdle, right? Which is trademark evaluation. So, we don't practice law here, but we do have an attorney. Has been with us for 17 years now. We have paralegals, and we'll do enough searching to get us on databases that we subscribe to, and we'll do the Google searches, and we're experimenting now with how we use AI to eliminate solutions or at least keep them in consideration. We'll get a client about 50 to 60% through the process by doing that. And then, and by the way, one of the things we do is one of the first meetings we have is with the client's counsel, so that we're aligned. And the beauty of having an attorney here is that it's, privileged information, attorney to attorney. So we have very open conversations, or our attorney does. So we have a good strategy for doing that. So that's one thing. The second thing we do, and we have developed, and no surprise here based on our research, we've developed software which allows us to analyze very objectively and technically certain qualities. So we do have sound symbolism in this software. So we want something that supports smoothness and speed, right? And so that software will eliminate names that may be very good names for, other things that might be a good name for a cosmetic that is healing and smooth, but it's slow. So and it's not eliminated, like we don't see it. It just doesn't show up in the top 20 names, right? We look for things like, we know that memorability is affected by either rhyme or rhythm. The new Chinese
DeepSeek.
DeepSeek. Yeah. Okay.
Interesting.
That's a very good name because it has rhyme to it, right? It also DeepSeek, right? It also has those, two E's and then two E's over there. So there's a structural pattern there that the mind remembers easily, right? And so that if we had put that in and said we want something, test for memorability, that would come up. It would have been probably in the top 10 names on that alone. So we're looking for memorability. We're looking for concreteness or tangibility. Example, Red Hat software, very memorable because I got a color and I got a hat, I got an object, right? So this just helps us very objectively look at things and get that. For all clients, we recommend a global review of the key languages, which are about 15 languages, represent something around, I think, 88% of all languages spoken in the important areas, right? I mean, there's really no such thing as a global name because there's so many different languages, right, and dialects and these things. But I'm really proud of this because it took a good deal of time and energy. But we have now, I think the number is 107 linguists in 78 countries that, are certified by us. Most of them are PhDs. Most of them work at universities. There's a few that are masters and teach or do other kinds of consulting things. And we have a questionnaire that we put these names on, and they fill out the questionnaire. So again, it's pretty objective, although we do give them opportunities to just voice their opinion, right? About the name, and they don't know the client. They never know the client, but they know the category. I suspect they can guess at the client, and so that comes back. And now, when we present to a client, we say, "Here's the name. Here's the creative rationale for it. Here's our cognitive science review, very objective, right? How it scores. Here's our linguistic review. Here's our legal review." And so all these things are kind of triangulated. So that most clients realize now, okay, at this point, I'm just not looking at raw material. They're not just throwing, darts to a board. These are valuable candidates that have the potential to, help us grow, which is really, when people ask me, what is Lexicon really about? I say that's simple. We're about value creation, right? Through a brand name, right? And it's easy for people to kind of, slide that down the hillside and to say, oh, well, these guys are namers. Well, we're really not. I mean, we do create names, but what we're really doing is we're creating value. And you can see that in, all the work we've done. And I think what keeps us moving and keeps us creating these really very effective names is that it's not about being a namer. It's not about being cute or creative or clever. It's about how do we create value for this company. And in the end, you have to be creative. You have to be disciplined. But value and growth comes first for us.
Yeah, that makes sense. One more question I had on the check is because this is something that's always debated, and I think just yesterday I saw a tweet from Paul Graham saying about .coms, and it was if you don't, he said that not having a .com is a sign of weakness basically, because you're kind of you're showing that there's ideally you would have the .com, and if you don't have it, then you're that's a form of weakness. But on the other hand, it's then you go obscure and how do you think about does it matter to have the .com name, the .com domain? You can imagine if you're naming impossible, that's a pretty hard one to get I'm sure they have it, but that's a hard one to get the .com for.
Here, I mean, it's a good conversation to have, and we do have it, not infrequently, but we have evidence from our clients and from some research that we've done that the .com is now becomes more like an area code or a zip code, and the real critical step here is does the name work, right? And when clients say, well, okay, that's really a good name, but we can't get the .com. I mean, we can get it, but it's $3 million, and so we have to give it up. We say you're really making a mistake. I think there's a narrow band in technology that says you need the .com, but I don't. I think communication is far more important than the URL. Now, good news is that because there's so many alternatives, right? And, AI, IO, BizNet, that .coms are typically not going for the millions or the hundreds of thousands of dollars. So, we encourage someone to, if they're kind of stuck on that, to pursue it. And if people are comfortable because they've raised enough money and they can spend, $50, $100, $150,000, $200,000 on a URL, if they have the money, then I say fine. It's part of your marketing budget. If they're tight on money, I say spend your money on communication, on ramping the brand up. We may well do another, and make it really highly statistically valid to maybe sort this thing out. Not Q1, but maybe Q2 on this. Look, Tesla started off with Tesla Motors. Didn't hurt them, right? We're lexiconbranding.com. Didn't hurt us at all. In fact, it tells people what we do, right? Now, at some point, Tesla had a lot of money, and I think they, paid, several $1 million for it. Well, they had the money, right? We have one client who paid $20 million for it. Now, I had to sign up. They were so embarrassed about it that we had, another separate NDA, which we already had with the company, to never disclose the people who paid $20 million for it. I mean, ridiculous.
I think it's come back. Like, there's more and more stories. Like, friend.com was like a big one recently, and then I know that a lot of dev tools I see are spending. I see a lot now who they sort of lease it, which I never knew was a thing until recently. But you can, I'm sure you know this, but telling other people that are listening, like, you can lease domain names, and it's like, it could be a lot. Like, it could be like 10 to 100,000 a year, or even more.
Great income for someone, and if that 100,000 is not that meaningful of a line item, okay. I mean, .com is a nice, clean hit. People doesn't say, well, what is, .io? So there is some efficiency to it, but it just depends on the value you want to place on it, and how much you'll see. So, but if you can send me the link to post where you got to have the .com.
I'll send it to you. And then, okay, so we've talked about Versel a little bit. Another big dev tool that you named is Azure, Microsoft Azure.
Yes.
How did that happen?
Well, and that is a different story than Vercel. So obviously it's Microsoft, and when they came to us, again, this is it's a gravitational pull, I think, on the part of clients to do something descriptive. And they said, well, we want you to work with cloud because, this is a cloud service. And so, and we, you do a quick Google search and you already, and then on a trademark search, and you begin to see, there's these cloud names, either starting with cloud or ending with cloud, are proliferating. And we said, all you're doing is you're walking yourself right back into a competitive set, which is going to be huge, right? Because there's going to be small players and big players in this thing. And you are Microsoft. And I think you can create an interesting story with something that is different, right? And I think we caught them at a time when Steve Ballmer was, jealous of things like BlackBerry and, PowerBook and these things. And so they introduced us into the process, and we said that we felt the best thing for you to do was something that's concrete, something that's real, but unexpected. And we did a lot of work. At the time, we had a very good client who then directly reported to Steve Ballmer, and we came up with this Azure, which was ding because some people say Azure, others say Azure, but it's only two ways. I mean, it's like we always give the example. Nike is pronounced about 5 different ways around the world. You know, I got my Knicks on, I got my Nikes, I got my Nikes. It doesn't slow them down, and we know the linguistic principle behind it. If it's easy to say, Nike is, Nikes are, okay, Knicks are, then you don't hesitate, right? It's very comfortable for you. And whether it's Azure or Azure, it's comfortable. And so, and we said, look, it's blue, you're right, and in blue sky. And so it's related to the cloud.
Yeah.
And that helped a lot. It made it more logical, right? I mean, Microsoft, as you know, very successful company, and has been over the years, very good client of ours. But that logic point helped. And then it was a very strong trademark, which is getting harder and harder to do. And it's done incredibly well for them. Partly because, for the marketplace, and this was our, I think, fundamental rationale to the Microsoft team, is that people do not expect Microsoft to come out with Azure. They expect Cloud Pro. And when you come out with Azure, they're going to say, wow, what's going on at Microsoft? What's happening there that they've got the confidence to do this? And I think that's exactly what happened. And I think it's a good story for, other companies thinking about developing a name, is that you don't have to be descriptive. You're just going to walk yourself back into the competition. And if you do something that's unexpected coming from you, it's going to be registered as bold and confident. And that means I should take a look at it. Yeah. I know it seems simple, and it is, but it's hard for people to, that tendency is, yes, but the name has to tell the story. It doesn't have to tell the story. What it does is it has to set you up so you can tell the story, right? And in that sense, a long time ago, and I say this now, it just came out of my mind, but we were talking to one client about, it's not the story. And I said, listen, what really matters here is the ability of the word, whether it's real or invented, to weave a story that's actually greater than the brand itself. And I think Azure did that. I think Vercel did that. And certainly Blackberry did it. And all those things have done very well in the marketplace. I realize it is hard for a client team to sit in a room and look at slides or, names on boards and say, well, I'm pretty comfortable with Cloud Pro. But I hear what you're saying about Azure. We're asking them always to sort of, take a leap, over a canyon. But it's not that far of a jump, and the canyon isn't that deep. It really isn't. But we're very empathetic to clients who have to make that decision, and we don't have to live with it, right? So we're empathetic, and we try to make sure we're recommending things that we think really work.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to dig into that point a little bit and kind of almost play like the devil's advocate, because I've definitely kind of, like when you're at the conference, there's always like someone that's like, oh, I don't know what any of these companies do. And they're just like, they're pointing out like some kind of like very, they're in the kind of more like, Versel kind of category rather than like the Cloud Pro, where it's like, it's not saying what it does on the tin. And they're like, at least I've heard people say that. So like,
yeah. Oh, we've heard it too. The reality is Cloud Pro doesn't really tell you what I do either, right?
Yeah.
It tells you that, we're doing something in the clouds, but at the conference and I see, 12 of other companies that start with cloud or end with cloud. They haven't done themselves. And, their job is to tell their story, to tell it to the right people, to have a message around it, to maybe have a positioning line under it, accelerating development, Vercel, accelerating development, something like that. And so you can tell your story pretty quickly. Humans are really adept and really quick at figuring out what's going on. It doesn't have to be in the name. The name is, we use the word vessel, right? The name is a vessel that allows you to tell your story. It carries it into the marketplace. It's not the story. You can't tell a story. And how could we tell what Vercel does in one name? You can't. But they can do it in a line. They can do it in a slideshow, in a deck, a presentation, and just that claim of we're going to accelerate development. Okay, I'm interested in that. And the name's Vercel. So in many ways, that name was pretty close to telling their story.
Yeah. It's very cool.
Yeah.
That makes sense. And then kind of I want to ask you a question. So if someone's got, is working on an idea, very, very early stage, they haven't raised money, they want a name. Have you got any kind of like processes that you kind of tell like people that are like at that really early stage, like, okay, go, start whiteboarding, start like anything that they could do to kind of come up with a better name than they might otherwise?
Yes, we do. And we get those calls and we're always helpful. Not everybody has money to do this. So the first thing I say, and really anybody that works here that takes a call like that would say, forget about naming right now. Just put that out of your mind. And if you're going to whiteboard with a team, think about two things. Think about how you want to behave in the marketplace. And the second thing is, think about how your brand is going to, in a small way or in a big way, change the future, change a category, right? Because any brand that's going to be successful has to bring some level of change to it, right? It could be, again, a big leap, and it could be a small leap, right? So if you just focus on that, right, and you say, well, okay, behavior, well, and I said, don't stop at, well, we want to be bold and aggressive. Okay, fine, but what does that mean? Then we say, take those behavior things and think about brands in the marketplace, not necessarily in your category, and say, well, we want to be more like North Face, which is about adventure, and less about Patagonia, which is maybe more stylistic and those kinds of qualities to it. I'm making this up. Out of that kind of dialogue becomes a sense of what you want to be, and you can inject a name in that and say, well, and just to play the game here, let's take Azure as a name. And let's say this company says, okay, behavior-wise, we really want to be, we like that North Face, a sense of adventure, keep the adventure going, right? And then you say, well, all right, here, so-and-so came up and there's a list here and there's this name Azure on here. Could we use Azure as a vessel, right, to create a line of clothing that was about adventure? If the answer is yes, then keep it on the list, right? But you got to work your way into name. You can't just start naming things because all you're going to do is you're going to have a bunch of clouds or infos or seeks or things like that. So, and then on that, how are you going to change the marketplace, right? Well, that's a real thing. There's where your promise comes through, right? And whatever that promise is, you have to say, okay, people have to believe that we can do that. So believability comes from letters and sounds that are more confident, right? Like B, Blackberry, two B's in there. B is very reliable. P, is reliable. Q, there's consonants, right? And so then you start saying, okay, whatever we choose here, we want to make sure we have some good consonants in there. And we're fast, so what are the slow letters? Well, O is a slow letter, so we can have an O or U in there, but we don't want to have too many, right? In there. So you start getting some criteria that people don't think about. And between that exercise, it usually yields some good thinking, right? They still may end up with, InfoSeek or something like that, but at least they've set some standards.
Yeah.
Yeah. We just say, forget about naming right now. Let's think about behavior. How are you going to change the future, right? And that's where we start with clients, right? We don't say, we don't start, in the first meeting. Well, what are your thoughts about a name? No, we say, we usually send an email in advance and say, we're really going to start talking about how you want to behave in the marketplace. And I'll give an example. And Microsoft versus Apple, they're both very good names. But they're very different, and they instantly, and I mean instantly, begin to telegraph a type of expectation and behavior, right? Both good. Apple just being more open, right? And not corporate. Microsoft, serious and corporate. So now, along the way, Microsoft could pull that back and become, more creative, more open, if you will, but harder to do. Apple could pull that back and become more corporate, but harder to do. So they put themselves on a path, right?
Yeah.
And so what path do you want to be on, right? Vercel, it's about acceleration. It's an innovative name. It's a coin name, so we know it's going to deliver on that because it's new to the world, and that's the path that they want to be on, right?
Yeah.
Impossible is a different path, right? It's like we've got an attitude. We've got an attitude. Talk about bringing change to the world. We got an attitude that's going to be reinforced with lots of science and lots of really talented people at Impossible Foods. Counterintuitive, right?
Yeah, like you're kind of going against
Yes, because their urge early on was, and we totally empathetic, we want to fit into Whole Foods, the grocery store, the chain. And so, and I describe it as, well, that's kind of, you want to be sort of a crunchy hippie brand. And well, we're going to make good food and we're going to want to peel it. I said, all you're going to do is you're going to walk yourself right into all those other products that are trying to be crunchy and feel good and wellness. And we can do that. And we did do it for them. They wouldn't let that go. And I understood. I said, okay, well, look, let's move into two columns here. Column A is, let's fit into that world of healthiness and crunchiness, good for you. And then let's do something different. And that's where Impossible.
Yeah, that's actually a good thing to think about as well. It's like, is it a way to stand out as well in terms of like just being very different and trying to do it like, do you take that into account? Like,
yes,
is this going to make me stand out in the market kind of thing?
Yes. I mean, there's no sense in launching a brand that at some level you're not going to stand out. You're just, remember what I said earlier, I think in today's digital economy, which is what we all compete in, even if you're selling toothpaste, you have to get early interest and early share to really survive, and not to mention thrive. And so standing out, we're not suggesting you stand out because this has got to be completely crazy and all that sort of stuff. No, I mean, there's a limit to how far you want to go. You want to be different, right? And it's always within the context. So Azure for Microsoft was very distinctive. If that had been Apple coming out with Azure, it would have been, oh, okay, well, I kind of expect that. Still interesting, but not as interesting as with Microsoft.
Yeah. Super interesting. David, I think we're coming towards the end. So I kind of wanted to just ask you, If there's one thing that you would say to founders at the stage of like naming, that you would say, like, just remember this, like whatever you do, just just think about this before you pick a name.
Yes, there is one thing, and it always gets people's attention. The name you choose will be used more often and longer than any other marketing device. Your color will change, your positioning will change, your product will change, right? And it's that one thing that people cannot take, your competitors cannot take away from you. It's that those two things by itself make it a highly valuable, highly important thing. So take your time, think about it. The right name, right? Not just a good name, right? And that really is my theme. When we talk to clients is, if you want the right name, you want to work with us. If you think, well, we just need a good name, then you can probably do that on your own, right? Because, anybody can create a name. But our emphasis is creating the right name. And if you get the right name, the return on investment is 100x. And the wall behind me, all those things, the return on investment has been incredible.
Yeah.
So when someone says, well, we don't have enough money for that, it's like 0.001% of a 3-year budget in marketing.
Yeah.
Easy for me to say when someone else is paying it more. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. And maybe it's going to work out cheaper if they don't have to buy the .com domain as well.
That's right.
Well, you'll find them a name that's doesn't need the .com. It's already available for $10.99 on Namecheap.
True.
Yeah, David, thank you so much. I really appreciate. I'm so glad we got to do this. So thanks for coming on and sharing.
My pleasure.